Thank you very much, Jyrki, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, indeed, comments from the ministry side, but no answers yet. We have this system that, well, we take evaluations, of course, very seriously. We strive to be a learning organization. That is something that is written in our development policy paper, in fact, from 2012. So we try to learn, and evaluations indeed are a key tool that we use in designing and preparing our future work. So there's a serious piece of work here, and we are trying to use take the maximum advantage of that in our preparations for our future cooperation with higher education institutions. But indeed, we have a system of responding to evaluations, which is that we prepare a management response. We, perhaps from the desk office side and the technical side, we prepare our points and how we might want to look at or respond to different recommendations from the ministry as a whole. And then we submit that to our management to be altered or approved. And this then will take some time before we have our so-called official response to the recommendations at hand. So I'm basically here to comment, but I think we also very much want to use this opportunity for having an open and frank discussion. So I'm going to ventilate some ideas also perhaps from a personal level, so we get some discussion going, because we also want to take advantage of this event also to feed into our own thinking and wish for a very open and honest discussion about the findings and the programs in general. So I'm going to pinpoint some recommendations and present some ideas that came out of those. First, let me just comment that I think also it was an excellent idea to have Mr. Boren here to comment. I think we have had too long in many of our different, in certain aid modalities, we have had this tendency of doing everything here, we have programs that were designed on a finished basis, and we have just looked at them from our own national point of view, when we really should be looking out and see how other partners are doing the same kind of activities and learn from them, and not to reinvent the wheel. And I also thank the evaluation team that you had also that focus in your work. You were also looking behind our own box, national box. Now, some comments on some of the recommendations. One of the evaluation report recommends that we should clarify whether the programs are aimed at capacity building in developing countries or internationalization, promoting internationalization of Finnish higher education institutions. From the ministry side, there can really be only answer to this, that it should be the former. Because when we are looking at the criteria for the use of ODA, it says that it should be used to promote economic growth and welfare of developing countries. So obviously that should be the starting point. And if it's not, then we are not really using the right budget line for this purpose. But then again, if in addition, to that objective, it promotes the internationalization, then that much the better. Of course, it's like the Undersecretary of State also here mentioned, that if it's mutually beneficial, of course, there's no harm in that. But it should not be only the internationalization agenda driving the programs. And I note, if I'm reading the evaluation, at least from my perspective, it seems to be saying that the Hei-Iki program has functioned more in the sense of how the ODA criteria should be telling us how to direct our work. There's the proposal or the recommendation to increase the support, the financial support to higher education institutions cooperation. Now, obviously, in these times of austerity, economic austerity, and also past decisions to revise downwards the planning figures for development cooperation in general, there is no way that the Ministry for Foreign Affairs could promise that at this point. But this is, of course, one of the issues that we will take back and see that, okay, this is a recommendation that comes out of the evaluation, that more volume would indeed make sense. And so it is an issue to be discussed and perhaps decision to be taken, but no way of guaranteeing anything, of course, today. Now, one of the proposals, important recommendations, is the one to merge the two programs, and this is something that we already anticipated from the outset. It seems to make sense. We knew that it would make sense from an administrative point of view, but it's good to note that it also seems to be making sense from the activities of the programs itself. I note the caveat that Mr. Buren also presented here, that it also then will probably produce some limitations in the activities. But indeed, that is something that we have already been thinking about, that a merger under a new program, one program, might make sense. A very important recommendation relates to the size of the cooperation programs. Of course, there's a link to the overall volume. But anyway, of recommending bigger programs with a longer time frame, that it makes sense from a capacity building point of view. This is an issue that we have sometimes discussed in the steering groups of both programs. First, does it make sense does it make more sense to have regular calls for proposals that are open to all and give a level playing field to all different kinds of proposals, new proposals, also from fresh actors with new innovative ways of approaching cooperation? Or would it make more sense to invest in longer-term partnerships that might be better resourced? Not only financially, but also from a know-how perspective and from an experience from the developing countries' circumstances and the conditions. Now, if a choice between these two would need to be made, then the evaluation seems to be pointing at the latter proposal of having more established long-term institutional relationships, which then would be, like Mr. Buren also pointed out, would be then to the detriment perhaps of new actors coming on board and thus limiting the scope of higher education institutions. It would be interesting to know here the comments of the higher education institutions themselves on this point. But if we would go to these more established, longer-term partnerships, indeed, it might bring us closer to the traditional way of the working of development cooperation, bigger projects with technical assistance components. But indeed, we would be very interested in having that discussion here of what direction we should be taking in the future. One of the points also in terms of concentration was a geographical concentration, that indeed we have a lot of programs dispersed in many countries in the world. We have been in the program documents, in the latest versions, we have been trying to direct that to a certain extent, also from the ministry side, coming from the developing program, from our development policy papers focus. But not too much. We have trying to make a compromise, which of having liberty, but yet some concentration. But maybe that has not worked. That is also an interesting point of view of hearing what comments you might have on those issues. One thing that was a little bit unfortunate was in that when we last time revised the project document for Hei-Iki, we were expecting the country strategies to be formulated in time, so we could tie those in with the Hei-Iki document itself, but they came too late, so we could not do that. So we had a call for proposals first, and then only the country strategies later. The report makes a recommendation of integrating research as a financially eligible component in the programs. In fact, hinting that we could increase the weight of research in the programs then at the expense of other support to development research that we are having from the foreign ministry side. We were expecting this kind of recommendation, in fact, to come up, because that's a criticism that we have heard from higher education institutions, that this limitation of excluding research from the activities is a harmful one. So we are quite ready to look at that. And indeed, there's perhaps a case of looking at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs finance development research activities and our cooperation with higher education institutions and academia in a wider sense, in a more holistic way that we have been doing so far. Our cooperation modalities are a result of historical developments. They have been established at different points of time, and it might be a good idea to have an overall view of our different kind of cooperation and find if there are synergies hitherto unexplored or unused. But this is not to say that we were not that this would be a promise of starting to compensate one kind of activity at the expense of another one, but only that we might want to have a more wider view of the different kind of cooperation that we are having, and how could we make it have that cooperation done in a more intelligent way. Finally, some of these issues in the evaluation are quite would alter our way of operating quite substantially. For example, this issue of development research and higher education cooperation. If we would really be starting to look at that from a wider angle, having a bigger change in the way we work, then that would be a lengthy process. A lengthy preparatory process would be required for that kind of an approach of redesigning the programs for the future. It could be a worthwhile one, but it would mean that we would not be able to launch a revised HEIKI/NSS program from the start of the next year. So if we would make a bigger change to the programs, then we might need to revise the timetable, and then we would, of course, need to look at if we would have a longer preparatory process for a revised program. Then we would, of course, need to safeguard that no harm is being done to the cooperation that already exists. And so that a successful cooperation that is out there does not suffer unduly from a delay, from a possible delay from a start of a new program. This would be also an interesting issue of hearing your views, whether how big is the change that we want. The bigger it is, the more time we need, and then we might need to have some kind of bridging measures being taken if we want to have a bigger change in the way we operate. Finally, I would just want to congratulate the evaluation team for a great work. Thank you. We'll certainly try to make it's a very comprehensive report. It provides valuable insight. There's a lot to digest, and we are starting that work now. Thank you.